I want to ask you how you and Jelani Cobb came together and decided to focus on the Kerner Commission as a film.
I actually decided to focus on it first. I read a book in 2018 written by Stephen Gillen, who's in the film, called Separate and Unequal, which was the story of the Kerner Commission. I'd certainly heard about the Kerner Commission prior to that, but I feel like every narrative I'd ever seen begins with the conclusion. So the whole process of them doing their work, doing their investigation, the field study, was not anything that I'd known about previously. I was busy at the time, but I was really impressed with the currency of all the ideas. My husband is an actor and a writer, and he was 5 years into producing and performing his one-person show, which is essentially about being a black man in America. And he was doing talkbacks after the shows, and race and racism and race relations were a staple of our dinner time conversations. And then the pandemic happened and sort of laid bare the racial inequities in a pretty stark way. And then George Floyd, and then this really insane controversy over CRT and the teaching of American history. And I kind of felt like this was the right time to tell the Kerner Commission story. And in researching a pitch to make to Cameo, I discovered that Jelani was publishing an excerpted version, like an annotated excerpted version of the Kerner Commission report. And he too had been moved to do so because of George Floyd, and we came together in that way.
So Cameo, in your role as an executive producer, you have to weigh a number of different pitches you get to decide which stories to move forward. What was it about this story that called out to you?
Yeah, well, one other part of the story is that unbeknownst to Michelle, when she was poring over the report, reflecting back, thinking about it, putting together this really incredible pitch, I had actually been having conversations with Jelani on the side. And Jelani was like, you have to let me do a film on the Kerner Commission. And I was like, oh, do I have a partner for you? And so from these two different sides, I got this plea to look at this subject. And as Michelle said, the timing was incredible. And you saw some of it in the film you saw a lot of it in the film. When you look at the recommendations of the report, when you look at the findings that this bipartisan commission came up with, it was everything that we were reading in the media in 2020, 2021, after George Floyd, after our spring and summers of protests. And it just, in a way, it was sickening, right? That we're talking about the exact same thing over and over again. Police brutality, the lack of jobs, discrimination, institutional racism. I mean, you'll all remember we had this summer where suddenly everyone was reading White Fragility, right? And it was just like that was the topic. And so for me, at American Experience, PBS's longest running history series, I thought if we can't do a film on this and we can't just connect the dots between what was happening then and what's happening now and draw some conclusions and show people that, as someone said in the film, that these commissions, they've been talking about these things more than 70 years ago. W.E.B. Du Bois was talking about these things. If we can't shed some light on the conversation and talk about it now, then what are we doing as a series?
Michelle, you started off this project with Jelani, very well researched. Both of you had immersed yourself in this period. But as you went out and interviewed Senator Fred Harris and other people who were eyewitnesses to the experience, were there things that that deepened your knowledge or came as revelations or surprises to you?
I would say the biggest surprise was John Powell, who I interviewed because he's the director of the Othering and Belonging Institute at the University of California at Berkeley, and he had hosted a symposium about the Kerner Commission on its 50th anniversary and given a fantastic keynote speech. And I was completely unprepared for the fact that he'd been in Detroit during the riot, during the uprising. And having him tell me the story that he told was pretty revelatory, because he went from being an expert to being a witness.
Let me take some questions from the audience. Raise your hand if you've got one. I'll call on you. Don't be shy. Yeah, right there on the aisle.
First off, it was amazing. I loved it.
Thank you.
One thing I was wondering was, so in terms of the more peaceful side of protests, obviously MLK, big factor, mentioned often in the documentary. The more violent side of it, or even Black Power, didn't have the same kind of face behind it in the documentary. The most notable person being Malcolm X, who wasn't mentioned. And I'm wondering, was that intentional, and was there a reason behind that?
Well, I think for us, the finding of the Kerner Commission was that these radical groups really didn't have any role in these protests, other than to have created a climate where people were more engaged and feeling more radical themselves. And we didn't feature Malcolm X because he wasn't the one in the FBI sights. It really was Stokely Carmichael.
Okay, thank you.
Question right here.
Hi, so such a pleasure to see your film.
Thank you.
I'm curious, so from what it looks like the only shot footage were the talking heads, the interviews, and then
Correct.
everything else is archival.
Correct.
So when you're working on an archival film, do you have a shot list? Do you have
Connie, are you laughing? My producer and our amazing archival producer. No, we were awash in material. Like, the sheer volume of material that's available in this period is stunning. I was very surprised that there was as much about the Kerner Commission and of the Kerner Commission that there was. It really shows you that this was a big deal in American society at the time, because we don't follow presidential commissions around very much. But we did have a sense of the story that we wanted to tell. And unlike the book, which used the commissioners sort of as a microcosm to the spectrum of ideological positions in the United States at the time, absent perhaps a radical, we knew we were going to have to render the macro, and that we were going to need to do a bit of business on the white population that was feeling invaded in the early 1960s and the calls for law and order. And so we had a good sort of topic list of things that we went looking for. And then you find gems that you weren't expecting, and pray to God you can get them in.
Any hands? Yeah, near the back.
I was just wondering, based on what you were talking about, the original intent of the film, was there any discussion in making the film to bring in current conversation with current lawmakers and policymakers about how things haven't changed and we're having the same conversations? I didn't know if that kind of dialogue was ever intentionally part of the film, or it's just too much to bring in to something historical like that.
Well, I mean, I think, our mandate was to make a historical film, and that was what is appropriate for the series. But quite apart from that, I feel like the power of the story, in a way, is the fact that we knew all these things 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago. And they still do get talked about. I mean, the Kerner Commission in particular gets trotted out on a regular basis in academic symposiums that do exactly what you were just kind of craving. I didn't want to make the film a conversation that you might see on CNN.
Any hands? Yeah, near the back.
Thinking about how this is a story of an echo of history and the moment that we're living in now. How do you see, if you were to try and make a film about this moment, how would you look at the like systemic pieces? Because you have this like very nuanced look where it's like, okay, you're showing all the context and seeing how it all plays together. I guess what I'm asking is, do you see any differences from then and now? Because we're focusing so much on the commonalities.
Well, I mean, certainly, it's a different world than it was in 1968, and we've made gains in lots and lots of ways. I don't think anyone could argue that we've been standing in the same place. But I do hope that we reflect on the commonalities going forward, because they continue to be an obstacle. I mean, we're not in a post-racial society, and racism, as we've seen pretty recently, is very alive and well. I don't know, at the beginning of your question, you were sort of posing an alternate film, and I would have to go away and think about that. But I do think it's important to look at what hasn't changed.
Cameo, probably each of us feels a moment or more moments watching this film where we are struck by a contemporary corollary, or and I wonder, for you personally, when you watch the film, what stands out to you the most as speaking to this moment, 2023?
I love that question. It's hard, though. Certainly the scenes of police brutality, of Black citizens being harassed on the street, that those feelings of hopelessness, economic despair, I think those things are really, unfortunately, resonant to me today. Certainly the impasse in the halls of Congress and government, the lack of responsiveness to the kinds of recommendations and the pleas from the citizenry, I think those are the things that probably hit me the most. But also personally, I spent many years before doing documentaries and before PBS as a journalist at CNN and NBC and ABC and other places. And when I see the monolith of perspective coming out of newsrooms, it's certainly, our newsrooms are certainly more diverse today than they were in '68. But the sometimes gullibility of the press, or the tendency to go for the most sensational story, the pictures and the images that are the most aggressive, salacious, provocative, that's something that I think also really echoes for me on a personal level. Like, I was at CNN during Hurricane Katrina, and there were we had debates in the newsroom about, are they looters or are they people looking for food, right? And so there are just elements of the kinds of discussions that happened then that are still happening today that again really sort of hit me in the gut, because I'm just like, as Michelle said, of course I agree we're in a very different place as a country than we were then, but too many echoes, right?
Michelle, you highlight the way the Kerner Commission honed in on the role of the media and the singular white lens that the media had at the time. And I wonder if you struggled with that as you're relying on archival footage to portray this era, knowing that you're kind of regurgitating that narrow lens.
Yes, I mean, we were very aware of that, and pulling against it at all times. I think in the beginning, when I was thinking about the film, I was thinking about it like Rashomon, which is not precise. But the idea that you would start with this event and see it really only through the eyes of this media that is overwhelmingly white. And this is what people in their living rooms are experiencing. And that then we would pull the threads on that portrait, and we would by the middle of the film, see something else that the Kerner Commission had discovered. So, very grateful to the media, obviously, because they were there and they were thinking about these things. I mean, there were a great many hour-long pieces, a lot of CBS reports, God loves CBS reports, where they were trying to understand what was happening in the United States. Unfortunately, and so like a lot of the clips that you see of Black Americans talking, they're pulled from these long news stories. But the stories themselves are shot through, at the very least, with casual racism.
Cameo, as we wrap up here, can you share with the audience when this film will be making its way to the broader public?
Absolutely, thank you for asking. The film premieres on PBS in May of 2024. It will be free to the public, obviously on broadcast, but also free to stream on PBS's video website, as well as the American Experience website. So we're just really proud, obviously, to be a part of this festival and to share this sort of sneak preview with people here, but we're also really looking forward to the wider broadcast where we hope millions more people will watch and get to engage with the content in the same way that we have in this Q&A. So really happy and really looking forward to having this incredibly emotional and powerful film directed by Michelle on PBS in May 2024.
Well, the festival continues through Thursday in person and continues online through Thanksgiving weekend. So if you need to get some distance from your family on Thanksgiving weekend, pull up the Doc NYC website and watch some good documentaries. Hope you get to see more at the festival. Thank you very much for coming. Thanks especially to Cameo. Yeah.
Can I just say one quick thing? First of all, I want to thank you so much for having us. It's been thrilling to be here. And I also a lot of the people who made this film with me and without whom I couldn't have made it are in the room. And so I would love it if you would all just stand and if we could have a
Please give them
hand for my
acknowledgement.
incredible collaborators. And thank you so much for coming. If you like the film, do tell your friends. We have a second screening on Sunday morning at 11:45 a.m.
Thank you to Michelle Ferrari.
Thank you.